The rain was relentless, hammering the glass walls of Horizon Airways headquarters in Chicago like 1,000 impatient fingers. On the 42nd floor, Michael Carter stood alone in his corner office, staring out at the grey smear of Lake Michigan, barely visible through the storm. At 49, he was lean, with sharp features softened only by the faint lines etched around his eyes. Lines earned from years of late nights, tough calls, and the weight of building an airline from nothing. His dark hair was flecked with silver, combed neatly, though tonight it was slightly mussed from running his hands through it. The desk behind him was a crime scene of customer feedback reports, graphs with red arrows pointing downward, loyalty metrics slipping, and a stack of printed comments that carried a tone he couldn't ignore. Something was wrong at Horizon Airways, and it wasn't just the numbers. Michael had founded Horizon 22 years ago with a single leased plane, a folding table in a Cincinnati hangar, and a stubborn belief that an airline could be more than a business. It could be a promise. Back then, he'd swept floors, loaded bags, and once spent an entire night apologizing to stranded passengers during a snowstorm. Now, Horizon was a national carrier with 25,000 employees, flights to every major U.S. city, and a reputation for reliability. But the reports on his desk told a different story. Satisfaction scores were dipping for the third quarter in a row, and the comments weren't about delays or lost luggage. They were about treatment, about passengers feeling overlooked, dismissed, or judged. The words weren't loud, but they cut deep. "Treated like I didn't belong," one read. "Ignored because I wasn't dressed like a CEO," said another. "The door swung open without a knock, and Linda Hayes strode in, carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee. At 61, Horizon's chief operating officer was a force. Silver hair cropped short, eyes sharp enough to spot a lie from across a boardroom. She'd been with Michael since the early days, back when they were a scrappy regional outfit with 3 planes and a prayer. "I take it you've seen the numbers," she said, setting a mug on his desk without waiting for a response. "I've memorized them," Michael muttered, not turning from the window. The rain streaked the glass in rivulets, blurring the city lights into a haze. Linda slid into the chair across from him, her navy blazer creased from a long day. "It's not just the scores, Michael. It's the patterns. People aren't complaining about flight times or baggage fees. They're talking about how they're treated, or rather, how they're not." Michael turned, his eyes narrowing. "I saw, and I don't like it." He pushed a tablet toward her, the screen glowing with a spreadsheet of complaints. "It's not random. There's a thread here, something about how our people decide who's worth their time." Linda scanned the tablet, her lips pressing into a thin line. "The board's already jittery. Kessler called this morning, whining about stock prices. He thinks we need a PR campaign to smooth this over," Michael snorted, picking up his coffee. "Kessler's been jittery since we didn't put caviar on the in-flight menu. He'll survive." But the unease in his chest didn't fade. He leaned back, tapping a pen against his knuckle, a habit from years of restless problem-solving. "Something's changed, Linda, and it's not something I can fix from up here." She gave him a look, the kind that usually preceded one of his bolder ideas. "You're thinking about going undercover again, aren't you?" He didn't answer. Immediately, the idea had been simmering since he'd read the first batch of complaints, but it crystallized now, sharp and undeniable. "Remember 2012, he said finally, "when our West Coast routes were hemorrhaging passengers, and no one could figure out why. I worked as a gate agent in Portland for 2 weeks. Found out the regional manager was cutting corners on maintenance checks to hit budget targets." Linda winced. "Don't remind me. I had to fire half the supervisory team. My inbox was a war zone for months." "We learned more in those 2 weeks than in a year of reports," Michael said, his voice steady but firm. "I need to see what's happening on the ground, not as the CEO, but as a passenger." "You're not exactly invisible these days," Linda warned, crossing her arms. "You were on the cover of Aviation Weekly last spring. That Fortune 500 panel in New York, the charity gala in Miami, people know your face. Michael glanced at the wall behind him, where a row of framed awards and clippings hung, most of them dated. His last major press photo was over a year old, and he'd aged since then, greyer, leaner, less polished in person than the airbrushed images suggested. To most of our frontline staff, I'm just a name in a training video, he said. And that's what makes this possible. Linda studied him, her expression a mix of skepticism and resignation. You're serious? 2 weeks, he said, leaning forward. Main domestic routes, Chicago, Dallas, Seattle, Miami. Economy class, no upgrades, no corporate account. I'll book under my middle name, Tom Bennett, and use my personal card. If there's a crack in our culture, I want to feel it myself. And how do you explain the CEO vanishing for 2 weeks during a performance dip? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Michael reached for a folder buried under the reports. That leadership retreat in Colorado you've been pushing me to attend. The one I said was a waste of time, Linda groaned. You hated that idea. I still do, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. But it's a perfect alibi. She took a long sip of coffee, her eyes never leaving his. If something goes wrong, if someone recognizes you or this blows up in our face, No, he said quietly, but if we don't find the problem now, we won't have a company left to fix. Linda stood, brushing imaginary lint off her blazer. Daily check-ins, no exceptions. And if anything feels unsafe, if someone starts connecting dots, you pull the plug. Understood. She paused at the door, turning back. This is a terrible idea, Michael. It's the right one, he replied. There was a long silence, the kind built on 20 years of trust. Then Linda sighed. Fine. But if you end up cleaning trade tables in Dallas, don't come crying to me. He chuckled, the sound low and fleeting. Noted. As the door closed, Michael turned back to the window. The rain had slowed, leaving the glass streaked and reflective. 2 weeks, 10 cities, no special treatment. One mission, to find out what kind of service Horizon Airways was really delivering when no one knew the boss was watching. What he didn't yet realize was that the answers would shake the foundation of everything he thought he'd built. The transformation was simpler than Michael expected. He traded his tailored suits for off-the-rack clothes, a pair of faded jeans, a grey hoodie, and a worn leather backpack he'd found at a thrift store. A pair of non-prescription glasses, slightly smudged, completed the look, along with a 3-day beard that made him look more like a tired academic than a corporate executive. He booked his flights under the name Tom Bennett, using a personal email and credit card, bypassing Horizon's executive travel system. He kept his frequent flyer status, platinum, earned from years of legitimate travel, but avoided perks. No early boarding, no express check-in, no lounge access unless he paid like anyone else. To the world, he was Tom Bennett, a logistics consultant visiting clients across the country. Unremarkable, forgettable, and perfectly positioned to see what others missed. His first flight, Chicago to Dallas, was uneventful on paper. The plane left on time, the crew was polite, and the coffee was passable. But Michael wasn't looking at the surface. He sat in economy, row 19, aisle seat, his backpack tucked under the seat in front of him. He watched the gate agents, the flight attendants, the way smiles landed and where they didn't. At O'Hare, he saw a woman in her 50s, neatly dressed but with a scuffed suitcase, asked for extra ID at the check-in counter. The agent's tone was professional but clipped, her eyes barely meeting the woman's. Minutes later, a man in a crisp blazer with a leather duffel was greeted with a warm, "Welcome back, Mr. Lawson," and waved through without a second glance. Michael pulled a small leather notebook from his pocket, its edges worn from years of use, and jotted down the time, the agent's name tag, Karen, and the interaction. No emotion, just facts. On the flight, he noticed more. A young couple in matching sweatshirts was asked to step aside while their seats were rechecked, despite being on the upgrade list. 10 minutes later, a man in a tailored quarter zip was escorted to first class with a grin and a "Right this way, sir." Michael wrote it down. 10:47 a.m., gate B12, couple delayed, businessman upgraded. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. Politeness, with a filter, a quiet sorting of who seemed to matter more. The Dallas leg sharpened the picture. At Dallas-Fort Worth, Michael sat near gate C22, sipping a black coffee and watching the check-in flow. An older man in a windbreaker, his Horizon app open to show diamond status, approached the counter. The agent, a young man with slicked-back hair, barely looked up. "You're a bit early, sir. We'll call boarding by group." His tone was flat, his eyes fixed on the screen. 10 minutes later, a woman in business casual with a designer tote walked up. The same agent smiled, tapped his screen and said, "First class boarding in 15, Miss Harper. I've got your upgrade status." "Ready." Michael's pen moved again. 2:14 p.m., gate C22, diamond member dismissed, businesswoman prioritized. He didn't flinch or sigh. He just watched, his notebook filling with timestamps and names. It wasn't overt disrespect. It was never that loud, but it was consistent, a current running beneath the surface, dividing passengers into categories, those who looked the part and those who didn't. That night, in a modest Dallas hotel room, Michael spread his notebook pages across the desk. 5 days, 3 cities, and a dozen incidents, each one small but deliberate. The pattern wasn't anecdotal anymore. It was a thread, tightening with every flight. He wasn't dealing with random judgments. This was a system of behavior, shaped by something deeper than a bad day or a tired employee. His next flight, Dallas to Seattle, was scheduled for the morning. He had a feeling the mask might slip again. The Seattle-Tacoma airport was a blur of glass and steel, the terminal humming with the early morning rush. Michael sat near gate N14, his hoodie slightly rumpled, his glasses fogging from the coffee steam rising from his cup. He'd chosen a middle seat on the flight to Miami, row 22, deliberately far from the premium cabins. His notebook, now nearly a third full, rested in his lap. He wasn't writing yet, just watching. The pattern held. A young mother struggled to collapse her stroller at the gate, her toddler tugging at her sleeve. The agent behind the counter, a woman named Emily, didn't look up from her screen. But when a man in a pressed suit with a glossy haircut approached, Emily stepped out to carry his briefcase to the jet bridge herself. Michael noted it. 7:32 a.m., gate N14, mother ignored, businessman assisted. On the flight, he saw it again. A flight attendant, Brian, walked past an older man struggling to lift his bag into the overhead bin. 2 rows later, Brian stopped to help a younger woman in designer sneakers who hadn't even asked. Michael's pen moved. 8:19 a.m., flight HA472, overhead assistance selective. His gut tightened, not with anger, but with clarity. This wasn't a glitch. It was a culture. In Seattle, he met Sarah Ruiz. She settled into the seat beside him at the gate, a woman in her late 40s with a warm smile and a canvas carry-on worn at the straps. She wore travel slacks and a collared shirt, practical but not flashy. "They did it to me again," she said, her voice casual but edged with frustration. Michael looked up. "The lounge staff?" "Yep," she said, nodding toward the Horizon first-class lounge across the terminal. "Rachel at the desk made me wait 10 minutes to verify my diamond status. Meanwhile, the guy behind me in a suit got a handshake and a welcome back before he even showed his ID." Michael tilted his head. "You fly often?" Sarah smiled, a little wry. "Sarah Ruiz," diamond since 2010. Used to be proud of it. Now it only counts if I'm dressed for a board meeting. He offered his hand. Tom Bennett, platinum. I'm doing some observing. Sarah raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. Instead, she leaned back, scanning the gate area like someone who'd done it 1,000 times. You notice it more when you're not traveling for work anymore, she said. I was in corporate sales for years. Suits, heels, the whole deal. Got upgrades, smiles, the works. Now I consult, dress how I want, and suddenly I'm waiting longer, getting random checks, missing upgrades even when I'm top of the list. Michael's pulse quickened. You keep track? She reached into her carry-on and pulled out a folded sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting, dates, flights, incidents. I'm a numbers person, she said. This stuff doesn't lie. He took a moment before speaking. Have you filed complaints? Twice, she said, her laugh short and humorless. Got the usual, we value your feedback email. Nothing changed. She glanced at the lounge. I don't want special treatment. I just want my loyalty to mean something, even in jeans. Michael nodded. I know what you mean. Do you? She asked, eyeing him. He smiled faintly. Let's just say I've had some clarity recently. The boarding announcement crackled overhead. Sarah stood, stretching. See you on the plane, Tom. We're in 22A and 22B. Hope you like window seats. As she walked away, Michael folded her notes and tucked them into his notebook. The cracks in Horizon's culture weren't just his now. They had a name, a face, a story. And if Sarah Ruiz was right, if other passengers were seeing the same pattern, this wasn't just a service issue. It was a betrayal of the promise he'd made when he founded Horizon. The flight from Seattle to Miami was half empty, the cabin lights dimmed for the late afternoon takeoff. Michael Carter, still disguised as Tom Bennett, sat in 22B, a middle seat in economy, his worn backpack stowed beneath the seat in front of him. The hum of the engines was steady, almost soothing. But Michael's mind was anything but calm. His small leather notebook, now creased from constant use, rested on his tray table. He'd added 2 brief entries during boarding. One about a gate, agent's dismissive tone toward a family with mismatched luggage. Another about a flight attendant offering unsolicited help to a man in a tailored blazer while ignoring a woman struggling with her carry-on. The pattern was no longer a suspicion. It was a pulse, steady and undeniable, running through Horizon Airways like a hidden current. Michael glanced to his left, where Sarah Ruiz sat in 22A, her window seat offering a view of the fading Pacific coastline. She was scrolling through her phone, earbuds in, but her earlier words lingered in Michael's mind. I just want my loyalty to mean something, even in jeans. Her folded sheet of notes, tucked into his notebook, was a quiet indictment of the airline he'd built. Sarah wasn't just a passenger. She was evidence. And Michael was beginning to realize that the problem wasn't just a few bad apples, it was a system that rewarded the wrong priorities. He was about to close his notebook when someone slid into the aisle seat beside him. Michael looked up, his instincts sharp, and paused. It was Rachel Morgan, a flight attendant he recognized from his Seattle to Dallas leg earlier in the week. She was off duty now, dressed in a Horizon-branded hoodie and jeans, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. Her phone was already out, thumbs tapping rapidly across the screen. She didn't glance at Michael, didn't seem to recognize him, and why would she? To her, he was just another passenger, unremarkable in his hoodie and glasses, designed to fade into the background. But Michael's pulse quickened. Something about her presence felt like a thread he needed to pull. He turned slightly toward the window, keeping her phone in his peripheral vision. Not intentionally at first, just awareness. Then a name flashed across her screen. Robert Klein. Michael's breath caught. Robert Klein was Horizon's regional operations manager for the Southeast, based in Atlanta, a rising star who joined the company after Horizon acquired a smaller competitor, Suncoast Air, 18 months ago. Michael had met him once at a leadership summit, polished, ambitious, with a knack for streamlining processes. But now, seeing his name in Rachel's messages, Michael's instincts sharpened. He didn't move, didn't shift his posture, just watched as Rachel typed. Guy at Sea Lounge looked like he wandered in from a thrift store, kept asking about diamond perks, flagged him in the system. A reply came almost instantly. Good catch. Same protocol at MIA. Re-verify ID. Random check if needed. Rachel's fingers moved again. Handled. Noticed him on this flight. Will flag at check-in. Another message from Klein. You know the drill. Keep it tight. Rachel sent a thumbs-up emoji and tucked her phone into her pocket, leaning. Back with a sigh. Michael's heart didn't race. His hands didn't tremble. He sat perfectly still, his mind racing through the implications. This wasn't just a pattern of behavior, it was a coordinated system. Words like flagged, protocol, and re-verify weren't casual. They were operational, deliberate, sanctioned by someone with authority. And that someone was Robert Klein, a manager with enough clout to shape frontline behavior across multiple hubs. Michael exhaled slowly, silently, his eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him. The cabin lights flickered as the plane climbed through a patch of turbulence, but the real storm was brewing inside him. Rachel pulled out a neck pillow and closed her eyes, oblivious to the man beside her. Michael opened his notebook, his pen moving with quiet precision. 6:22 p.m. Flight HA319, C to MIA. Off-duty FA Rachel Morgan texting Robert Klein. Passenger flagged for appearance. Protocol referenced. He closed the notebook, sliding it into his backpack. For the first time since this journey began, he felt not just frustration, but a quiet, focused fury, the kind that didn't explode but planned. That night, Michael didn't sleep. He sat at the small desk in his Miami hotel room, the curtains half open, letting in the neon glow of South Beach. His notebook lay open, surrounded by printouts he'd requested from Linda Hayes via a secure email, internal memos, policy updates, and performance logs from Horizon's southeast hubs. For days he'd been documenting individual behaviors, subjective human moments. But after what he'd seen on the flight, he knew it wasn't enough to expose a few rogue employees. He needed to understand how the system had been built to enable them. The messages between Rachel and Klein weren't idle chatter. They were procedure, embedded in a framework that had taken root under Klein's oversight. Michael traced Klein's name through the memos, finding references to a priority guest protocol introduced 14 months ago, shortly after the Suncoast acquisition. The protocol was framed as a way to enhance efficiency by prioritizing high-value passengers during check-in, boarding, and lounge access. On paper, it was benign, corporate jargon about streamlining operations. But buried in the fine print was vague language, frequent flyers, premium travelers, and brand-aligned presentation. That last phrase made Michael's stomach churn. It wasn't about loyalty or ticket class. It was about optics, about who looked like they belonged. He dug deeper. Linda had sent back-end logs from gate agent systems showing manual overrides, re-verification prompts, and upgrade denials. They weren't triggered by objective criteria like seat class or frequent flyer status. They were initiated by human judgment. Michael found multiple overrides linked to Rachel Morgan, the lounge attendant in Seattle, and Kevin Walsh, a gate agent in Miami. Sarah Ruiz's notes, still tucked in his notebook, aligned with the data. Delays, re-verifications, and denials for passengers who didn't fit the profile. The protocol had become a filter, a soft system of exclusion executed behind smiles and uniforms. Michael leaned back, rubbing his temples. This wasn't a training issue or a case of outdated policy. It was a leadership problem. Someone, Klein, or someone above him, had decided that dignity was conditional and handed the power to enforce it to people with no business deciding who mattered. He added a final note to his list. Robert Klein, Southeast Ops, Architect of Priority Protocol. Manual overrides centralized under his authority. The page was full now, the ink bleeding slightly at the edges. He didn't need more evidence. He needed accountability. The next morning, Michael arrived at Miami International Airport 3 hours early, his hoodie swapped for a wrinkled button-up shirt, his glasses slightly crooked. He wasn't just observing now, he was testing. He approached the Horizon first-class lounge, his platinum status visible on his app, his boarding pass ready. The attendant, a man named Kevin Walsh, glanced at him, his smile thin and perfunctory. "Can I see your ID, sir? We need to verify your status for lounge access." Michael handed over his driver's license, keeping his expression neutral. "I'm platinum, should be in the system." Kevin tapped his screen, his eyes flicking between Michael and the monitor. "Just a moment. Sometimes these things need a second check." His tone was polite but edged with skepticism, as if Michael's faded shirt and scuffed backpack disqualified him from the privilege. Behind Michael, a woman in a sleek blazer approached, her designer tote gleaming under the lounge's soft lighting. Kevin's demeanor shifted instantly. "Welcome back, Ms. Ellison," he said, his smile wide. "Your usual table's open. I'll have your coffee brought over." Michael didn't flinch. He didn't protest. He just watched as Kevin waved. The woman threw without checking her ID. When Kevin finally returned to him, he slid the license back with a curt nod. "Looks like you're clear, Mr. Bennett. Enjoy your stay." Michael took the license, his eyes locking with Kevin's for a brief moment. "Thanks," he said, his voice flat. He stepped aside, sat in the public terminal, and opened his notebook. 8:47 a.m., MIA Lounge, Kevin Walsh. Delayed verification for platinum status. No ID check for next passenger. Appearance-based. He closed the notebook, his jaw tight. The irony didn't sting. It clarified. He'd built Horizon to serve everyone, to be a promise of fairness. Yet here he was, denied access to his own lounge because he didn't look expensive enough. He scanned the terminal, his eyes landing on the frosted glass doors of the lounge. Kevin was back to smiling, greeting another customer, a man with a leather briefcase and polished shoes. Michael didn't need to see more. The problem wasn't just in Miami or Seattle or Dallas. It was everywhere, woven into the fabric of Horizon's operations, and it had a name: Robert Klein. The flight from Miami to Chicago was routine, but Michael's mind was elsewhere. He sat in 19C, an aisle seat, his notebook now too full to add more than a few lines. He documented enough, 27 incidents across 6 cities, each one a variation on the same theme. Passengers judged by their clothes, their luggage, their lack of polish. Sarah Ruiz's notes had added 5 more, her experiences mirroring his own. But it was Rachel's messages to Klein that had shifted the stakes. This wasn't unconscious bias or inconsistent service. It was deliberate, systemic, and sanctioned. Back in Chicago, Michael checked into a modest hotel near O'Hare, avoiding the luxury suites Horizon's executives typically used. He spread his notes across the bed, the pages a patchwork of timestamps, names, and observations. He emailed Linda, requesting personnel files for Rachel Morgan, Kevin Walsh, and Robert Klein, along with any communications tied to the priority guest protocol. Linda's reply came within the hour. "Files sent. Be careful. Klein's got allies on the board." Michael opened the files, his eyes scanning Klein's record. Promoted quickly after the Suncoast acquisition, Klein had overhauled regional operations, centralizing manual override powers at the gate and lounge levels. His performance reviews praised his efficiency, but were silent on customer experience. Rachel and Kevin had both received commendations under Klein's supervision, their names linked to exemplary adherence to priority protocols. Michael's Pen circled their names, then Klein's. The rot had a source, and it was deeper than he'd feared. He stood, pacing the small room. Tomorrow, he'd return to Horizon's headquarters, not as Tom Bennett, but as Michael Carter, CEO. The glasses would come off, the beard would be shaved, the hoodie replaced by a tailored suit. But what he carried inside, notes, evidence, and a quiet fury wouldn't change. He wasn't just fighting for Horizon's reputation. He was fighting for the promise he'd made when he started the airline, that no one would be left behind, no matter how they looked or what they carried. The transformation back into Michael Carter began at dawn. In the hotel bathroom, he shaved, the beard, the razor gliding smoothly across his jaw. The glasses were tucked into his backpack, replaced by his usual contacts. He pulled on a navy suit, the fabric crisp and familiar, and tied a burgundy silk tie with practiced precision. The mirror, he didn't see a different man. He saw himself again, realigned, resolute. The notebook, now battered but complete, went into his briefcase, along with the personnel files and Sarah Ruiz's notes. Horizon's headquarters buzzed with its usual morning rhythm, baristas at the lobby cafe calling out orders, receptionists offering cheerful greetings, polished shoes echoing on granite floors. But when Michael walked through the glass doors, the air shifted. It wasn't his suit or his stride. It was the look in his eyes, focused and unyielding, like a storm gathering strength. Linda met him on the 42nd floor, waiting in his office with a stack of reports and a laptop connected to the boardroom's AV system. "The meeting's at 10, she said, her voice low. "Legal's on standby, HR's briefed. No one knows details." Michael nodded, shrugging off his coat. "Kessler complained about a golf tournament in Scottsdale," Linda said, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "I told him he could explain his absence to shareholders if he preferred." Michael's mouth twitched. "He'll be there." He sat, flipping through the reports, passenger complaints, override logs, and Klein's policy updates. Each page was a piece of the puzzle, and together they formed a damning picture. Linda watched him, her expression unreadable. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," he said, his voice like steel. "This isn't about saving face. It's about saving what we stand for." The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Horizon Airways Chicago headquarters was a study in polished efficiency. A long glass table reflecting the city skyline, 12 leather chairs filled with board members, investors and advisors, and a faint hum of anticipation in the air. Michael Carter stood at the head of the table, his navy suit crisp, his burgundy tie knotted with precision. The man who had spent 2 weeks as Tom Bennett, hunched in economy seats, scribbling in a worn notebook, was gone. In his place was the CEO, his presence commanding but not theatrical, his eyes carrying a quiet intensity that silenced the room before he spoke. The clock on the wall read 10:03 a.m., and the board members, including a visibly irritated Richard Kessler, waited for him to begin. "Thank you for adjusting your schedules," Michael said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "What I'm about to share isn't a report or speculation, it's evidence, and it demands immediate action." He pressed a button on the remote in his hand, and the screen behind him flickered to life. A spreadsheet appeared, rows of timestamps, names, and incidents, pulled from his notebook and corroborated by passenger complaints. He didn't rush, letting the data speak first. 27 documented cases of differential treatment across 6 cities, each tied to appearance-based bias. A woman in casual clothes asked for extra ID at a lounge. A family with worn luggage delayed at boarding. A businessman in a tailored suit waved through without question. The room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the projector. "For the past 14 days, Michael continued, I've been a passenger on our flights. Not as your CEO, but as Tom Bennett, a platinum member traveling economy. No upgrades, no perks, just a man in a hoodie and jeans. And what I experienced wasn't a customer service issue. It was systemic bias, based on clothing, luggage, grooming, and assumptions about who matters. He clicked to a video clip, grainy but clear, recorded discreetly on his phone at the Miami lounge. Kevin Walsh, the attendant, was seen delaying. Michael's entry, his tone clipped while welcoming a woman in a blazer with a warm smile. Another clip showed a Seattle gate agent ignoring a struggling mother while assisting a man with a glossy briefcase. The board members shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, others glancing at each other. Kessler, his arms crossed, opened, his mouth to speak, but Michael cut him off with a single sentence. Then explain why I, your CEO, was flagged for secondary verification 3 times in 4 cities while wearing a $40 jacket. The room froze. No one moved. Kessler's mouth closed, his eyes narrowing. A former airline executive, Margaret Chen, leaned forward, her voice measured. Michael, this seems anecdotal. Are you sure it's systemic? Michael's gaze didn't waver. It's not anecdotal when it's documented across 6 hubs, corroborated by passenger complaints, and enabled by a policy called the Priority Guest Protocol. He clicked to a new slide, displaying an internal memo from Robert Klein, Southeast Operations Manager. The phrase brand-aligned presentation was highlighted in bold. This protocol, introduced 14 months ago, gives frontline staff discretionary power to prioritize passengers based on vague criteria. It's not about loyalty or ticket class. It's about optics, and it's created a culture where dignity is conditional. He laid out the evidence methodically. Override logs showing manual re-verifications, passenger flags tied to appearance, and text messages between employees referencing protocols for handling non-premium travelers. He didn't name Klein yet, letting the data build the case. When he revealed Sarah Ruiz's notes, 5 incidents from a Diamond member dismissed for her casual attire, the room's mood shifted from skepticism to unease. This isn't just about me, Michael said, his voice steady but heavy. It's about people like Sarah Ruiz, a 15-year Diamond member who's been loyal to Horizon since we were a regional carrier. It's about the elderly man lifting his own bag while staff look away. It's about the family-told upgrades are closed while a businessman is escorted to first class 10 minutes later. We failed them, quietly, systematically, with a smile. Kessler cleared his throat, his voice tight. This will be expensive to fix. Retraining, policy rollbacks, potential PR fallout. Not as expensive as a class action lawsuit, Michael said, his tone unyielding. Or as costly as betraying the trust of the people we claim to serve. He outlined his demands. Immediate suspension of 15 employees, including key personnel involved in the protocol. A full rollback of discretionary override systems. Mandatory retraining for all frontline staff, and the creation of a passenger advisory council to report directly to his office. The board voted quickly, 10 in favor, 2 abstentions. Kessler was one of the abstentions, his jaw tight, but he didn't argue. Michael stood before the room could relax. This is only the beginning, he said, his eyes scanning each face. I'm not here to save face. I'm here to change the face of this company. By noon, the suspensions were underway. Michael handled 3 terminations himself, starting with Robert Klein. The meeting was held in a small conference room, away from the boardroom's glass and grandeur. Klein arrived at 12:30 p.m., his suit immaculate, his expression a mix of curiosity and confidence. At 38, he was young for his role, with a reputation for efficiency and a knack for charming superiors. He sat across from Michael, expecting a routine discussion. Mr. Klein, Michael said, not rising, his voice like a blade. Please sit. Klein sat, his smile faltering. Is this about the policy review? Michael slid a folder across. The table, its contents a damning compilation. Override logs, passenger complaints and screenshots of Klein's messages to Rachel Morgan. This is about your priority guest protocol, your abuse of manual override systems, and your pattern of discriminatory flagging practices across multiple hubs. Klein's face tightened, but he leaned back, his tone smooth. With respect, Michael, the protocol was designed to streamline operations. High-value passengers drive revenue. We were reducing friction for them. You reduced dignity for everyone else, Michael said, his voice low but unyielding. You gave staff permission to judge passengers by their clothes, their luggage, their appearance. You built a system that flags people like Sarah Ruiz, a Diamond member, because she doesn't wear a blazer. You flagged me because I didn't look like I belonged. Klein's eyes widened, then narrowed. That's an overreach. The data shows improved efficiency metrics. The data shows you betrayed our values, Michael cut in. You assumed no one was watching. You were wrong. Klein tried to deflect, then to posture, his voice rising. You can't pin this on me alone. The board approved the framework. I was executing a strategy. Michael didn't blink. And now I'm executing accountability. He nodded toward the door, where a security officer waited. Your access has been revoked. You're done. Klein stood, his face flushed, and looked back once, perhaps hoping for a reprieve. Michael had already opened the next file. Rachel, Morgan and Kevin Walsh followed, their terminations swift but quieter, their defenses crumbling under the weight of the evidence. By sunset, 15 employees were gone, their system access locked, their actions under review by legal. That night, Michael stood in his office, hands in his pockets, watching the lights of O'Hare blink in the distance. The city was alive, planes tracing paths across the sky, each one carrying passengers who trusted Horizon to deliver more than a flight. Linda entered quietly, her tablet under her arm. It's done, she said. Systems locked, terminations processed, legal satisfied. We start rebuilding tomorrow. Michael nodded but didn't turn. Book a company-wide broadcast. First thing in the morning, every employee, every terminal. I want them to hear it from me. Already scheduled, Linda said. She paused, her voice softening. You did the right thing, Michael. He exhaled slowly. Let's hope it's not too late to make it right. At 9 a.m., Michael stood alone in Horizon's broadcast studio, a small room with a single camera and a red light blinking on. Across the country, in lounges, break rooms, flight decks and baggage tunnels, 25,000 employees watched live. There was no script, no teleprompter, just Michael in a dark suit, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his voice carrying a quiet gravity that silenced even the busiest terminals. Many of you know me as the founder of Horizon Airways, he began, his eyes locked on the lens. What you may not know is that I started this company with a single plane, a folding table, and no guarantee we'd last 6 months. I swept hangars, loaded bags in the rain, and apologized to passengers face to face when we failed them. I built Horizon not just to fly people but to serve them, fairly, with dignity. He paused, letting the silence settle. 2 weeks ago, I left this office and became a passenger again. Not as your CEO, but as Tom Bennett, a man in seat 22B. And what I saw changed everything, not because of how I was treated, but because of how I saw others treated. People like Sarah Ruiz, a 15-year Diamond member dismissed because she didn't look like she belonged in first class. An elderly man lifting his own bag while staff looked away. A family-told upgrades were closed while a businessman was escorted to first class minutes later. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth carried its own weight. We failed them quietly, systematically, with a smile. And for that, I take full responsibility. He leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting to resolve. That ends now. As of yesterday, we've removed 15 employees whose actions violated our values. We've suspended override protocols that enabled discrimination. We're launching mandatory retraining for all frontline staff and a leadership immersion program where every executive, including me, We'll work gate and cabin roles 2 days a year. And we're creating a passenger advisory council made up of real customers to hold us accountable from boarding to baggage claim." He paused again, softer this time. "You may wonder why I'm telling you this. The answer is simple. Silence is complicity, and this company will no longer be complicit." His voice lowered, not for drama but for honesty. "When I was 20, I got stranded at an airport overnight. My flight was cancelled, no money, no voucher, just me and a broken vending machine. I asked a gate agent for help. She looked at my frayed backpack, my worn sneakers, and said, 'You'll figure it out.' I slept on the floor that night, watching others board flights while I waited. I promised myself that if I ever built something, no one would be treated like that under my watch." He looked directly into the camera, his eyes steady. "Somewhere along the way, I forgot that promise. But I remember now. The red light dimmed and the broadcast ended. Across Horizon's terminals, a ripple moved through the ranks. Some employees looked down, reflecting on their own actions. Others looked up, inspired by the call to change. No one looked away. That afternoon, Michael returned to O'Hare, not as a CEO with a press entourage, but as a man watching. He stood near gate B17, the same gate where he'd seen Sarah Ruiz brushed off days earlier. An elderly couple approached the counter, their luggage modest, their boarding passes creased. The agent, a young woman named Carla, smiled first, checked them in, and stepped around the counter to help with their bags. No elite labels, no fancy luggage, just 2 people seen. Michael's notebook stayed in his pocket. It was a start. The tarmac outside Michael Carter's office window glowed under the late afternoon sun, planes taxiing in slow, deliberate arcs across O'Hare's sprawling runways. Inside, the office was quiet, the usual buzz of Horizon Airways headquarters muted after the morning's broadcast. Michael stood near the glass, his suit jacket draped over a chair, his sleeves still rolled to his elbows. The small leather notebook, its pages creased and ink-smudged, sat closed on his desk, a silent testament to the journey that had brought him here. 2 weeks ago, he'd been Tom Bennett, a man in a hoodie scribbling observations in economy seats. Now he was the CEO again, but the weight of what he'd seen lingered, heavy and unshakable. Linda Hayes knocked once before entering, her tablet tucked under her arm. "Sarah Ruiz is here," she said, her voice steady but carrying a hint of warmth. "I've set her up in the small conference room. No press, no cameras as you asked." Michael nodded, picking up his notebook. "Thanks, Linda. Any updates on the retraining rollout?" "Started this morning," she said, tapping her tablet. "Every hub's on board: Chicago, Dallas, Miami, Seattle. The new modules emphasize equal treatment, no exceptions. The leadership immersion program kicks off next month. Kessler's already grumbling about working a gate shift." Michael's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Let him grumble. He'll learn more at a check-in counter than in a boardroom." Linda raised an eyebrow. "You're preaching to the choir. What about the advisory council?" "First meeting's next week," Michael said, his tone firm. "Sarah's the first member confirmed. I want her input on the rest of the panel." He paused, glancing at the notebook in his hand. "She's the reason we're here." Linda studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Go talk to her. She's waiting." The conference room was a stark contrast to the boardroom's grandeur. A simple oak table, 6 chairs, and a window overlooking the terminal. Sarah Ruiz sat near the window, her canvas carry-on at her feet, her posture relaxed but alert. She wore a collared shirt and travel slacks, the same practical attire from their encounter in Seattle, but her eyes carried a new curiosity as Michael entered. She stood, offering a handshake, her smile cautious but genuine. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her tone teasing. "Or should I say Mr. Carter?" Michael chuckled, shaking her hand. "Michael's fine. Thanks for coming, Sarah." I know Chicago's a detour for you, she shrugged, sitting back down. When the CEO of Horizon Airways asks to meet, you make the detour. Besides, I wanted to hear what happens next. Michael took the seat across from her, setting his notebook on the table. You spoke up at that gate in Seattle, he said, his voice steady. You didn't have to, but you did. You shared your notes, your story. That made a difference. Sarah's smile faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. All I wanted was to matter to the company I've flown with for 15 years. Diamond status used to mean something. Lately, it's felt like a label that only works if I'm in a suit. Michael nodded, his expression mirroring her seriousness. You always mattered. We just stopped showing it, that's on me. He opened his notebook, sliding it toward her. The pages were dense with his tight handwriting, timestamps, names, observations, each one a piece of the puzzle she'd helped him uncover. Your notes gave me the push I needed, he said. They confirmed what I was seeing wasn't isolated. It was systemic, and it had to stop. Sarah flipped through the pages, her fingers pausing on her own folded sheet, still, tucked among his notes. I wasn't sure you'd listen, she admitted. I've sent complaints before, got the usual emails. We value your feedback. We're sorry for your experience. Nothing changed. This time it's changing, Michael said, his voice firm but not forceful. 15 employees are gone, including the manager who built the system that flagged you. We've scrapped the override protocols that let staff judge passengers by appearance. Retraining starts today, and every executive, including me, will work frontline roles 2 days a year to understand what our people and passengers go through. Sarah's eyebrows rose. You're serious about that? You're going to check bags and pour coffee? Already did it once, Michael said, a faint smile breaking through. Back in 2009, I worked a baggage claim in Cincinnati during a storm, dropped a suitcase on my foot, learned more in one shift than in a month of meetings. She laughed, the sound light but real. Okay, I'll believe it when I see it. But what's to keep this from happening again? Policies change, people forget, and suddenly I'm waiting 10 minutes for a lounge attendant to verify my status because I'm in sneakers. Michael leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. That's why I want you on our passenger advisory. Council, you and others like you, real passengers, not executives or consultants. You'll have a direct line to my office, input on policies, and the power to call us out if we slip. I need people who've felt the cracks in our system to help us rebuild it. Sarah leaned back, crossing her arms, her expression thoughtful. That's a big ask. I'm a consultant, not a corporate type. I travel for work, not to sit in meetings. I'm not asking for meetings, Michael said. I'm asking for your voice. You saw the problem before I did. You documented it, spoke up, even when you thought no one was listening. That's what we need. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I'm in. But on one condition. Don't let this be a one-time fix. Don't forget what happened, and don't let it happen again. Michael extended his hand across the table. I won't. They shook, and he slid a folder toward her. 2 first-class vouchers, good for any Horizon route, and a draft charter for the advisory council. The vouchers aren't a payoff, he said. They're a thank you, and a reminder that you belong in any seat in any lounge, no matter what you're wearing. Sarah took the folder, her smile returning. You're not what I expected, Michael Carter. Good, he said, standing. Neither is the new Horizon. The Passenger Advisory Council met for the first time a week later in a conference room at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Sarah Ruiz was there, joined by 4 other passengers, a retired teacher from Chicago, a small business owner from Miami, a college student from Seattle, and a frequent flyer from Atlanta, who'd been flagged for re-verification one too many times. Michael sat in, not at the head of the table but among them, listening as they shared their experiences, stories of being overlooked, dismissed, or judged, each one echoing the notes in his notebook. The council's first recommendation was simple but powerful: a new training module called Every Passenger, Every Time, emphasizing equal treatment regardless of appearance or status. Michael approved it on the spot, and by the end of the month it was mandatory for every Horizon employee. The Leadership Immersion program launched the following month. Michael was the first to participate, working a gate shift at O'Hare. He checked in passengers, tagged bags, and even helped a young mother collapse her stroller at the gate, a small act that earned him a tired but grateful smile. Richard Kessler predictably complained through his entire shift at a Miami check-in counter, but by the end, he'd admitted to learning something about the chaos of peak hours. Other executives followed, some grudgingly, others with a newfound respect for the frontline staff they'd once overseen from a distance. Michael returned to the terminals often, not as Tom Bennett, but as himself, watching quietly from the sidelines. At Seattle-Tacoma, he saw a gate agent named Carla, the same one from his post-broadcast visit to O'Hare, assist an elderly couple with no visible elite status, her smile genuine, her help unprompted. At Dallas, a lounge attendant greeted a young couple in sweatshirts with the same warmth as a businessman in a suit. The changes weren't universal yet. Habits died hard, and not every employee embraced the new standards. But the tide was turning. Passenger feedback began to reflect it. Complaints about treatment dropped by 15% in the first month, and loyalty scores ticked upward for the first time in a year. One evening, Michael sat alone in his office, the city lights painting Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and blue. His notebook, now retired, sat on a shelf beside a framed photo from Horizon's early days. Michael, 27, grinning, in a hangar with a broom in his hand. He opened a new laptop, its screen displaying an email from Sarah Ruiz. "Flew to Atlanta today," she wrote. "Lounge staff didn't bat an eye at my jeans. The agent even offered to carry my bag. It's a start, Michael. Keep it going." He smiled, typing a quick reply. "We will. Thanks for holding us accountable." Before closing the laptop, he opened a blank document and typed a single line, a new guiding principle for Horizon's training manuals and onboarding packets. Respect isn't a feature. It's the flight. He saved the document, then stood, his eyes drifting to the planes outside. Each one carried a promise, one he'd nearly forgotten, but would never let slip again. Weeks later, Michael walked through O'Hare's Terminal 2, his suit replaced by a simple jacket and slacks, no tie, no briefcase. He wasn't observing this time, just traveling, a rare personal trip to visit his sister in Denver. At the gate, a young agent named Javier checked him in, his smile quick and professional. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Carter," he said, handing back the boarding pass. "Safe travels." Michael nodded, tucking the pass into his pocket. "Thanks, Javier. Keep up the good work." As he boarded, he passed a family in matching sweatshirts, an elderly man with a scuffed suitcase, and a woman in a hoodie with a platinum tag on her bag. They were all greeted the same: seen, valued, no questions asked. Michael took his seat in economy, row 19, and opened his book, a novel this time, not a notebook. The plane taxied, the engines roared, and as the ground fell away, he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. Horizon Airways wasn't perfect, no airline could be, but it was moving forward, one passenger at a time, one promise kept. And for Michael Carter, that was enough. The story of Horizon's transformation spread, not through press releases, but through passengers like Sarah Ruiz, who shared her experience online, sparking conversations about fairness in travel. Comments poured in. Stories of being overlooked for wearing the wrong clothes, of loyalty ignored because of a faded backpack. But there were new stories too, of gate agents offering help without hesitation, of lounge staff welcoming everyone with the same smile. Horizon's employees began to share their own reflections, some admitting to past mistakes, others inspired by the chance to rebuild trust. Michael read every comment, every post, not as a CEO, but as the man who'd once slept on an airport floor, promising himself he'd build something better. He didn't respond publicly. Horizon's actions would speak louder than words. But late at night, when the office was quiet, he'd open his laptop and draft new policies, each one a step toward keeping that promise. If this story moved you, think about a time you felt judged by how you looked or dressed. Maybe it was at an airport, a store, or a job interview. Share your experience. It might resonate with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in real change, in leadership that listens, keep watching. Horizon's story isn't over. Neither is yours.